content marketing webinar. My name is John Sonnhalter. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. The presentation will be about 40-45 minutes, and Joe will answer questions at the end. If you have a question, you can submit it in the box on the lower right-hand side of your screen. We know your time is valuable, and we won't keep you more than the 60 minutes allotted for this presentation. A copy of this deck will be made available after the presentation on SlideShare, and we will provide you a link. Now to the presentation. In the world where content is king, it is important for business and business marketers to engage in effective messaging. This webinar will be a place to learn more about the growing area of content marketing. We are fortunate to have an old friend, Joe Pulizzi, with us today as our guest presenter. Joe is a content marketing evangelist and founded the Content Marketing Institute, which includes the Chief Content Officer magazine. And he also has an annual event called the Content Marketing World, which this year will be held in Columbus on September 4, 5, and 6. And more information is available on contentmarketingworld.com. Joe is also CEO of SocialTrack, a leading blogging service for service professionals. And lastly, Joe has co-authored 2 books, Get Content, Get Customers, and Managing Content Marketing. So if you all welcome Joe, we'll walk us through some of these initiatives for us to consider when it comes to this corporate storytelling. And again, Joe, welcome, and thanks for joining us today.
John, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it, and hope we didn't bore too many people with the About Me overview. We're going to get right into it. As John, as you were saying, we are going to go about 40 to 45 minutes. We want to make sure we're respectful and we get to a lot of the questions that are coming. So if you have a question, just don't wait till the end. Go ahead and type it in the Q&A box, and we'll get to that at the end, and we'll get to as many questions and answers as we can. So I'm going to talk a little bit about content marketing today. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the term content marketing, but it's sort of a buzzworthy term today. And we're going to go through a little bit of the history of that and then talk about some very tangible opportunities that you can use in your business today. So, John, you did all the introduction for me. I don't need to go through it. Basically, Content Marketing Institute, SocialTrack, we just focus on helping marketers today become really publishers and how they can focus on owning their media channels. And we do that through educational events like Content Marketing World, Chief Content Officer magazine. We also do some consulting for some large brands like Tyco, AT&T, and PTC. So the agenda today, I'm going to start off with some research about what is happening in the content marketing industry. We're going to talk about some real-world content examples, and then I'm going to share some at the end just about what we've done at the Content Marketing Institute, really just focusing on content marketing itself and how we've grown into a fairly successful operation by using content. And the reason why I'm going to share that today is so you can take those and use those into your business, because whether you are a small, medium, large-sized business, nonprofit, consultant, doesn't matter. You can take these things, these tools and strategies around content marketing and make it work to attract and retain customers. So I like to start out with a little bit of, my dad was a history teacher, so I like to start out with a history lesson. And this is the Furrow magazine, and this is from John Deere. This is the 1931 issue. But John Deere has been publishing the Furrow magazine since 1895. And you might ask, what is John Deere doing publishing a magazine? Well, basically, this is one of the first representations that we know of what we would call modern-day content marketing or corporate storytelling. So the whole idea was, and this is the oldest picture that I could find of a farmer, but basically, you know, their target audience were farmers, and there's a lot of new technology going on at that time, and John Deere was like, well, how do we educate them about all the different technology going on so they can grow their business? Because an advertisement in the paper or flyer is not going to do the trick. They actually had to create thought leadership type content to get there so that they could educate their customers enough with helpful information so that ultimately they would be in a mindset that they could buy their products and services. And here's the Furrow today. This is the website, and then that's the digital magazine. The Furrow is distributed to over 40 countries internationally and 1.5 million in distribution. So this is over 110 years old 120 years old publication. And one of the first concepts that we use talking about content marketing. So what I really want to get across here is that this content marketing, even though you may not have heard it before or only in the past year or so, content marketing is not new. Corporations have been telling stories to engage and attract customers for a long, long time. And here's another example that I'd like to talk about. Of course, many of you have probably heard about Jell-O, billion-dollar brand today, but how they started in the early 1900s. Do you have any idea of how Jell-O got its start? I mean, how do you actually market this gelatinous, colorless in some cases? You put it in the freezer and and you're going to eat it, you're like, how do you actually sell that? Well, what they did was they created a recipe book, and some of the recipes had Jell-O ingredients in them, and went door to door giving away free recipe books. And lo and behold, a year later, they became $1 million brand and now a $1 billion brand. So it's really amazing what can happen when you give away really valuable, compelling, and relevant content information to your customers. And really what we're talking about is publishing. I mean, everybody knows publishing. You all know media companies. Publishing is just the activity of making information available for the public. But it's different today because the stakes have really been raised, and I'll talk about that before, because it's harder. It's easier and both harder than ever to become an expert publisher or content marketer. And we talk about the barriers to entry. Like, why is everybody talking about content marketing? Why are we talking about being able to publish really compelling, original stories? Talk about this in my first book, at Content Get Customers. It's because those barriers to entry are gone. In the past, to become a publisher, you had to actually spend quite a bit of money. You had to target the right people. You had to put an infrastructure together. You don't have to do that anymore. And there's basically 3 reasons why. First is content acceptance. Our customers, prospects will accept our content in 3 seconds. They'll accept anybody's content in 3 seconds if it looks and feels right to them. You don't have to be the Wall Street Journal today or the leading trade magazine publisher in your industry for them to accept your content. They're going to do it in a heartbeat. So we all have that opportunity. Talent. In the past, it was hard to get really good talent in our industries to help us tell stories, to help us edit our content, whether that's today on the textual side or on the video side. But today there is more talent than ever before. And I actually, a couple months ago, went and talked to a group of journalism students about where the future jobs were, and I said to them, and I said, this is the most exciting time ever to be a journalism student. And they looked at me like I had 2 heads. And they're shaking their heads saying, there's no jobs out there. Media companies aren't hiring journalism students, and there's not the opportunities there used to be. And I said, you're just looking in the wrong place. The corporations are hiring journalists in droves right now. Just to give you an example, I did a workshop a couple months ago for 13 mid-sized technology companies, and every one of those 13, and these are not media companies, but every one of those 13 companies had an open position for a managing editor or a journalist. Do you believe that? So non-media companies are the ones hiring journalists today. So we have to think about that for our business as well, and I'll get into why a little bit later. But technology, the third barrier to entry, you, me, the signpost, we can all get a blog up and running in 5 seconds, and it's pretty much free to do that. So there's no technology barriers anymore. So if you want to be a publisher, you want to get out really good, consistent content, or unfortunately, really bad content, you can do it pretty easily today. This is, if you haven't seen this information, I would suggest that you all go to Google zeromomentoftruth.com. So if you go to zeromomentoftruth.com, and the link is at the bottom of the page, basically it's a fantastic custom content project, content marketing project from Google. But this is what they said was in 2010, before somebody made a buying decision, they engaged in an average of 5 different sources before they made a buying decision. So we're talking about our consumers are in complete control, and they're going out on the web, and they're getting that information. In 2010, the average was 5 sources before they made a buying decision. 2011, that doubled to 10. Do you believe that? That is, so they are, there's so much more information out there, and yes, the stakes have raised, but we are actually engaging with more content than ever before than we made a buying decision. And actually, I've heard estimates that this number will raise to 15 to 20 next year. So it's actually increasing. So that's when it comes to content marketing. And if you don't know what content marketing is, I'm going to give a little bit of a tutorial here now. Hopefully you've gotten the gist of it, but let's talk about it. So this is the only definition slide that you'll see today, because I just think it's important that everybody understands what the practice of content marketing is. And simply put, it's the idea that marketers are publishers today. Well, why should marketers become publishers today? Why should we own our own media versus renting the channel? So let me give you an idea. If you are renting your media channel, you are buying an advertisement, let's say in your trade magazine. Well, you're renting the attention. They want, the attention of that person consuming that information. They're looking at the content, the articles in that, and hopefully your ad around it distracts them quite, enough where they will pay attention to that. By the way, there's nothing against traditional advertising. We still use it, still works, but it's different today, and I'm going to explain why. Versus owning the channel, where our customers come to rely on us as the content providers and the experts versus anybody else in the industry. So it's the whole idea that to attract and or retain customers, we're going to create or curate valuable, compelling, or relevant content on a consistent basis to do something. To do what, right? And you have to make that decision for your own company, and you have different goals, content marketing goals in your company. It might be to maintain or change behavior in some way. It might be for them to download something. It might be a direct sale, a lead, brand awareness, whatever the case is. You're trying to do something with your content. This is, I think, the thing that hits home when I do presentations. I probably will do over 100 presentations this year. I'm hoping to cut that back next year, but this year it'll be about 100 presentations. And I love to talk about this because I think it's so important and really talks about the opportunities in content marketing today. So I want you to think about what is the difference between a marketer, and you see the brands on the left side, and a publisher or media company, right? So what is the difference? And actually the content that marketers create versus the content that publishers and media companies create, it's exactly the same except for one thing. So I'll just give you a second just to think about what that one thing would be. Can you think about what the only difference is between the content on the one side versus the content on the other? And this is it. It's just how the money comes in. That's it. What we're seeing is exact same types of processes and the exact same types of content and the exact same types of channels from marketers today versus publishers and media company, and the only difference is how the money comes in. And I'll give you an example. If I'm a publisher today and I'm creating content, how do I make money off of that content? I do that two ways. One is that content is sponsored. Like if I do a magazine, I actually would have an advertisement or a sponsor in that magazine. The other way would be if somebody pays directly for that content, paid content. That's basically the two ways that publishers and media companies make their money off the content. How do marketers make money off of their content? They do so by selling more products and services, attracting and retaining customers in some way. That's it. But everything else remains the same. So when you talk about the rules have changed, they have completely changed, and they're actually exactly the same for marketers and media companies today, because we're all vying for the same attention from our customers or readers, if you will. And it's this whole thing called storytelling. And of course, search engines have been around for a long time. Search engine optimization, lead generation. Now we've got social media. For those three things to work, and I'm sure you've got one, two, or all these goals as part of your organization. In order for these to work and work well, you have to tell compelling stories. I mean, nobody told us why we had to wake up in the morning one day and say, oh, you're not in marketing anymore, you're in publishing. But that's exactly where we're at today, because we are seeing the transformation of marketing departments become actually looking and feeling more like publishing departments today. Think about it. To be found in search engine optimization, how are you going to be found by those keywords? You're going to have some compelling piece of content that people link to in some way and share, and we're seeing that more and more as Google's changing their algorithms. More on that later. Leads, how are you like white papers or ebook downloads or a webinar or something like this, right? This is lead generation activity. And then social media, I mean, nobody's going to share your story unless you're interesting. Right? Nobody's going. I think it's funny, right? I mean, just think about Twitter, for example. A lot of people are trying to figure out Twitter, and they think it's stupid, and they don't get it. But if you're going on Twitter and you're just talking about yourself all day long, nobody's going to care. You got to talk about things that people care about. Think about yourself at a cocktail party, right? If you're at a cocktail party, the person that's the most interesting is the one that's telling the most fantastic stories that are relevant to those people listening. That's what we want to think about. And so we want to become the magnet. And we don't really care how we do it, right? We don't care if it's through search engines or social media, through print, or through SlideShare or YouTube or whatever, right? We want to become that magnet, and you become that magnet by being the best storyteller, by being the best content marketer in your industry. And I wanted to focus on this easier yet harder. Now, the barriers to entry have gone. It is easier to do this today. I mean, you could individually, you could start a publishing operation tomorrow. Anybody can. You can use a WordPress blog. It's free software. You could get somebody to develop it for you. You could start telling really compelling stories, and you're up and running. So, but the problem is there's more content and more, let's put it this way, bad and crappy content out there, and it's harder to get attention than it was before. So you've got to make sure that, one, your storytelling is the best in your industry, and second, you've got to make the connections online so that storytelling is shared, and we'll talk about some ways to do that a little bit later in the presentation. If you haven't seen this, like the Google report from Zero Moment of Truth, you've got to take a look at this. Just type in, this is the blog post that I did on Coca-Cola's Content 2020. So just type in Content 2020 into Google. My blog will come up, or the videos will come up. It's 17 minutes. There's 2 videos. Why I compel you to watch these videos, it's that important, because basically what Coca-Cola has said is they are betting the farm on content marketing or brand storytelling, and they go through, it's an internal marketing presentation that they make, from all I can tell, and they're basically saying, oh, the 30-second ad is dead, advertising as we knew it is dead, and it's all about telling compelling stories, and that's how Coca-Cola is going to win in the future. And it's amazing, because this is really it's probably the most significant moment for content marketing, because it's the first time that one of the largest brands in the world that spends the most on advertising has said that the way that they are going to market is not going to work into the future and does not work as effectively now. So I just wanted to show you this, because if you have a chance, you really have to go take a look at it. All right, so I'm going to share some research with you. This is some research that Content Marketing Institute performed with Marketing Pros. We went out there and surveyed 1,000 corporate marketers. Here's what we found. 90% of them are actively creating and distributing their own content today. They're using content marketing. I don't honestly know what the 10% are doing. I don't really want to know, but hopefully this number will be 100% in the future, because I don't know how else you're going to do it. The average marketing budget spent on content marketing is about 25%. 26% of the budget is spent on creation, execution, and distribution of content. That's internal and external resources. Smaller companies, it's higher. You're spending more on it because it is really a David versus Goliath strategy. We'll talk about that in a second. Larger companies spend less because they're spending still more on paid media channels. This kind of tells you, this is only half the chart, because this goes way down into all the channels, but basically this says, what tactics are we using? 80% of us are creating articles, our own original articles. 74% of you are creating content specifically for social media. 65% of you have blogs. By the way, that number's up from 28% in 2008. It's hard to believe. And by the way, even though there are 65% of blogs out there, there are a lot of them that have been abandoned. So don't take that number with a grain of salt. There was some recent research out from IBM that said, I think it was 80 or 85%. 80 to 85% of blogs out there have less than 5 posts associated with them. So what that tells me is that there's a lot of abandoned blogs out there. E-newsletter 63%, in-person events 56%, videos 52% of you out there are doing it. Webinars like this one 46%. Basically, you look at that, folks, we are publishers today. These are all publishing things. I worked at Penn Media, headquartered in downtown Cleveland for 7 years, and oversaw the custom publishing operations there. And this is the kind of stuff we did. I mean, this is the kind of stuff we did at Penton. I mean, we were doing media stuff, and then we started to say, well, we're going to do this stuff for our customers. That's you. So you are starting to do all these things and move through. Wanted to show you some social media stats. Basically, the big 3, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, all 70 plus. YouTube, 56%. That Google Plus number is now much higher. This was done back at later last year. Now Google Plus is probably into the 30 to 40%. The fastest growing social network of all time, Google Plus. So we've got to start paying attention to that. And SlideShare, we'll talk about that later, is a sleeping giant. So especially for you B2B folks, you want to be paying attention to SlideShare. 60% are increasing their spending over the next 12 months in content marketing. And we are seeing this full boat. And John and I, we were just talking about this a second ago. It is amazing. Companies for the last 2 months are just waking up to this. They're saying, oh my gosh, we got to have social media. We got to have all this stuff. But they realize is they have to have a way and a process and a mechanism to create really compelling stories in order for that social media to work. So the storytelling comes first, then the social media. So it's great, right? Everybody's a content marketer today. The barriers to entry are gone. There's no problems. The world is our oyster, except for the fact that there are some major issues, and a lot of you out there, a lot of us and a lot of companies we work with are having major issues right now with their social media and content marketing, and this is what we're seeing as part of the research. The biggest challenge that our survey participants have is 41% producing the kind of content that engages. Folks, it's easy to create content. Anybody can create content. Creating content that really truly engages our customer base, that's tough. Doing it on a consistent basis, that's even tougher. That's what publishers do. And that's why we're seeing the transformation of marketing departments as more and more look like publishing departments. So for the next 20 minutes, so that was a little 20-minute overview for you. The next 20 minutes, we're going to go through some real-world examples. I'm going to show you some ideas. I'm going to go through some things that I've done personally that we've done at the Content Marketing Institute that have worked really well. And my whole goal is you take one or two of these things away and you can execute those immediately, whether that's from a strategic standpoint or a very tactical standpoint. Let's talk about the niche content mission and platform. So a lot of us, when we're creating our content, we're too vague. We go too large. But if you look at a company like a big company out of Cincinnati, Ohio, Procter & Gamble, they really focus on their niche, their personas. And here's a sample site. This is Homemade Simple. And this is a media site, folks. This is really good, compelling. They have recipes and tips for the home and how to keep the home organized. And they target, their persona is, the mom, the wife on the go. Trying to keep the home in order. There's not dads out there, but this is their persona for this group. And trying to get helpful, healthy recipes for the kids, they focus on this niche for that persona group. BeingGirl.com. I got to tell you, I don't spend a lot of time at BeingGirl.com. You can see by what's on the site that hopefully I don't. But basically, this is for adolescent women. And this is Procter & Gamble's site targeting them. And they've created a real amazing community here, but a lot of it is based in original, helpful content for young women. And then you've got, this is more for me, manofthehouse.com. And this is for dudes that, whether they're talking about dealing with kids or meals about father or fatherhood or issues with your wife or significant other or products that the dads would like, that's Man of the House. And they really focus on what those personas are, and they're very niche about that, and they do it very purposefully. And that's what we have to do too. You have to think about it. That's why content strategies get so sticky sometimes, because you have multiple decision makers that you're targeting. And sometimes we go out with one big fat content strategy to target all those people, and you've got somebody like and by the way, Procter & Gamble has many more of these sites. I'm showing 3 of them, and that's what. So what I need you to do is I need you to start thinking about getting super niche. What does super niche stand for? What is that? So I'll give you an example. What if, let's say you were in the pet industry. So I think that if you wanted to be the leading expert in your niche in the pet industry, I think like Petco and PetSmart, they sort of have that locked up, right? It's very tough to become the leading expert going that wide. But what if you really super focused on a niche that were something like issues pertaining to pet owners who like to travel with their dogs? You could get that niche, and it makes sense for your business. That's the type of content. We want to go small, not big. You can always go bigger. It's hard to go big to small. So when you talk, you want to be the leading expert in something. So if you don't feel you can be the leading expert in the world in pets, you got to go smaller. And oh, by the way, there is a site called Fido Friendly, and that's exactly what they do. It's about the dog owners that travel with their pets. So, and there's also RVs and Dogs is another publication. So the folks, you got to get niche, because if you're going to present yourself as the leading expert, you got to get as niche as possible to have this make an impact on your customers. So once we get really niche with our content, so figure out what you're going to be the expert on, because frankly, most of the companies we deal with, they go wide. They go so wide because they want to cover everybody. You can't do that and do that well, so go small with it. And then we want to go define what we're going to do and flood that with great content. So when I say define the term, what do I mean? I think there's opportunities for you, especially with the open access publishing, where you can actually define an industry. And I'll give you an example of it done really, really well. This is from GoToWebinar, Citrix, and we're on it right now. This is a site called workshifting.com. And workshifting is the idea that I can work from anywhere. And it targets people that work from the home office, they work at the Starbucks or the Panera Bread, they work at the airport, they work at the bus station, where they're working at the hotel. They work everywhere. And this site gives them all kinds of helpful information about that target person. And it makes sense for GoToWebinar and GoToMeeting to do that because they're targeting people that want to have business meetings but may not be in the office all the time to do that. So they created consistent, relevant, very shareable content on this site, and they've been doing this for 3 years now, I believe. And if you type in work shifting into Google, you'll find over 2 million results. And first of all, 2 million results about work shifting, unbelievable. They define this term. Hold on, I gotta go back here 1 second. They define this term, and there's these 2 million results. But if you type in work shifting, Citrix comes up all, the first 3 entries are all Citrix. They're all GoToMeeting. They're all coming up that way. So they've defined a category. People are now using that terminology, and when they do, all they see is Citrix. Unbelievable. And I think there's an opportunity for a lot of people. Now, we've tried the same thing. We've done the same thing with content marketing. Now, wherever you're at in your life cycle standpoint of when you heard about content marketing is a brand new term. I started using it back in 2001. Nobody called it content marketing. 2007, we went out strong with content marketing. Still nobody was using content marketing at all in 2007. But we said, no, that we really felt there was an opportunity with this, and we put a ton of content behind it, calling everything that people formerly called custom publishing, custom media, branded content. We called it content marketing. And then here's the results. Basically, custom publishing for years was the term. And this is Google Trends that you're looking at right now, was the industry term. And you'll see back in 2008, nothing, right? Nothing on content marketing, but slowly, 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 slowly. And now content marketing is the most popular term in the industry. And actually in the last year, it's really escalated. So I should update this. It's really gone crazy now. And that is played right into our court, because if anybody types in content marketing, all they do is find us. And all we did was we just put a lot of content behind it. And you can do that too in your market. So if you're listening to what's going on, we'll talk about how to do that in a second as well, because there's some different tools that you can use. 10-to-1 content. Reimagine your content as you go. I'm going to give you an example of this, but the whole idea of reimagining content is there's not just one story platform. There's not just one story. I talked to a publisher, this is about 9 months ago, and I said, how are you communicating the changes in social and the different channels to your journalists that just used to do an article? You just used to sign a story, used to do an article, and you're done. And he said, everybody that is assigned an article today, they have to give me 14 pieces of content. I said, really? Are you kidding me? 14? I said, what do you mean 14 pieces of content? He said, well, I don't want them doing a tweet on the way to an interview. I want them giving me a video interview. I want them giving me an audio interview Q&A. I want the transcript of that. I want a Facebook post of that. I want pictures taken, and I want Facebook posts on that. I want 3 blog posts, and then I want the article. And then I want tweets after that promoting that article, whatever. And then I want a slideshare. I mean, he's going through all this stuff, and I'm like, wow, has the journalist and the storyteller's role really changed? But really, this is where we have to be today, because we want to get the most out of our stories. So figure out what your main deliverable is, and I'm going to give you an idea of an ebook, kind of like a PowerPoint presentation that you pass around if you don't know what an ebook is, and then ways to break it up. And I want you to think before and after, and think about different things like headline and the keyword focus and whatnot. But let's go through the example. So the main deliverable was this ebook, but we have to pre-activate it, which means how do we seed it within our community so people get excited about the story. Then we have all the distribution options, and then what can we do to reimagine that content after the fact and repurpose that in different ways. So how do we pre-activate it? Well, what we like to do with a lot of our stories is we want to get our customers and our readers involved on the front end. So we had over 50 case studies in this playbook. This is about a 60-page playbook. And if you want to see it, actually just go to contentplaybook.com. It'll come right up. Free, no gates or anything. So we got all the case studies in this were from people that once they knew it was out, were willing to share it. Very important, right? Because you want to get as much reach and sharing out of this as possible. So we pre-activated it. Then how do we distribute it? You have to think about how are you going to distribute it on your website? Is it one blog, multiple blogs? What are you going to do on Google+, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Twitter? You've got different ways to approach that distribution. Are you going to do a news release around it? Is it one news release? Is it two news releases? Are you going to integrate it into your e-newsletter? Do you put the exact version on SlideShare or a different version on SlideShare? What do you do? Do you have a print newsletter or print component? What do you do there? I mean, and I can go on and on forever. But there's more than 10 ways that we're going to distribute that content right there. But we have to plan for that up front. And then how do we reimagine? And when you're talking about reimagining content, I always like to use my first book, Get Content, Get Customers, because the plan was I started the blog, and the first 6 months of blog posts actually became the majority of what that book is. But I planned for it. And you can do that in your own company. Like, let's say you want to write your own book or do an ebook. Well, take your other initiatives like your blogging stuff or your newsletter and plan for that, and you can reimagine and re-leverage that content as you go. Why this is so important with distribution and search engines is because Google has completely changed the rules. They first fiddled with their algorithm back in early 2011. They called it the Farmer Update, Panda Update. And they said it was the first time that they were really going to start looking at social media sharing and factoring that into the search results. Well, their most recent update, when they did this whole search plus your world and came out with a big Google Plus push, what they've said with that one is that if your content is shared more than other content, that will be favorable with search engine rankings. So what that means, if you care about search engine optimization at all, you better care about social media, because Google's looking at it that way. And they're really integrating. I mean, I talked to one of the leading search engine optimization experts a couple months ago at Blog World event. We were talking, and he said, I don't think I'm going to have a business much longer unless we change our strategy. I said, what are you talking about? He's like, well, first of all, SEO is not rocket science anymore, because it's all about really good storytelling, and as long as you know the basics like meta tags and headlines and URL, you're okay. But the second thing is it's all about social. Search and social are going hand to hand, and distributing your content is very important to getting it shared by other people. I want to spend 2 seconds on SlideShare, because I wish I could see a raising of hands here of everybody on the call, but I'd like to say, how many of you are using SlideShare? Usually about 10 to 20% of people are using SlideShare. SlideShare, if you're not familiar with it, SlideShare is the YouTube for PowerPoint presentations. It is a sleeping giant, folks. There is more searching going on in SlideShare than you can possibly imagine. There's two benefits to using SlideShare. First, you can distribute your own content. You can then embed that content into a blog post like this one we see here is the Content Marketing Playbook. You can take that, you can embed it into a blog post. Fantastic. It also gets great search engine traction. So if you want to, maybe you don't have a credible enough site to be found in searches, you could actually, if you want to be found for, let's say, Content Marketing Playbook, you put Content Marketing Playbook as your title on SlideShare, and it has a really good opportunity to be found. Like this up here has 18,000 views, and most of those actually came from SlideShare itself. This one is unbelievable, because this will tell you the playbook was up about 6 months ago. Fast forward to the present, this predictions SlideShare we put up on December 18, 2011. I checked it this morning. It's up to 43,000 views, most of those from SlideShare. These are businesses, folks. These are businesses looking for information on content marketing. I'm sure they're looking for on mechanical design. They're looking for it on construction. I don't care what industry you're in. They're either looking for it on search or they're looking for it directly on SlideShare, and they're sharing this with their colleagues and others, and there's an opportunity here. And I'm going to end up here for the last 7-8 minutes here and talk about how you can dominate your category with content marketing and social media. So I'm going to share with you my story. I'm hoping you take a couple things out of this because we've been through it. I've been in the industry for over a decade now. But really started to get active with blogging. Here's my first blog, April 26, 2007, called Why Content Marketing. And we went out strong in content marketing. And it took quite a while to get people to pay attention to this. I didn't have much of a following for a while, but it takes time. It takes an investment. This is an investment in assets. Content is an asset that you have. How did we do it? So we went out with this term. Why did we even pick this term at all? Because we went out and talked to our customers. What can you do to find out what because if you're going to be a really good storyteller, you've got to figure out what your customers' pain points are. How do you do that? You can do that through asking customer service, ask your employees, your sales reps. I'm going to share a couple tools that I think you should be doing right now. This is Google's keyword tool. Just type in Google external keyword tool or Google keyword tool, because what we want to know is we want to know what the terms are that people are searching for right now. Now, this might be basic to a lot of you, but I know a lot of you aren't looking at this for storytelling. Because we want to do is we want to see if there's opportunities for us to talk about certain keywords that are maybe being searched but are not competitive. There's an opportunity. So looking on this chart, content marketing definition, for me, I'd say, oh, I should go after that right now. There's an opportunity there to actually create storytelling series around those concepts. Google Trends, what we want to do is once we put in our main keyword terms and then find all the variations with what I just showed you with Google's keyword tool, then we take them into Google Trends and see if there's a trend going forward. Well, this one here, I'm looking at content marketing, and I see, wow, this is trending up, big opportunity, just like a stock, right? You think of it just like a stock, and you're going to hedge your bets. You're going to say, well, I'm going to put my money in this stock because this is a really, really good trend. You can do the same thing with the keywords for your story ideas. So there's a big opportunity there. This is Google Trends, free service as well, and highly recommended. Probably one of my most favorite tools looking at it. Then Google Alerts. I don't know how many of you use Google Alerts. You probably do to make sure that when somebody talks about you in the press or online, you get a notification of that. But we want to use it for storytelling. We want to use Google Alerts to listen. So if somebody's sharing relevant content, we can then take that content and share it with our social media audience. We want to build story ideas, and we also want to build our influencer hit list. Who's talking about the things that are important to me and my business? And then do I need to pay attention to them? Do I need to have somebody hang out on their blog? Do I need to comment on them? And you should have a list of 10 to 15 or so people on your influencer list that you're paying attention to constantly, that your social media person or whoever in your marketing department is paying attention to, so that you can start building those relationships online with the right people where your customers are hanging out. We want to still listen. How do you listen? You can use something like TweetDeck for Twitter. It's fantastic. There's Hootsuite. There's Deliverit as well. I like TweetDeck from a visual standpoint. Anybody that on the left side, I put content marketing in quotes or whatever your keyword is, and I can see where whoever's talking about whatever they're talking about, I can see that live and that happen so that I can decide, okay, is this something that sales needs to get involved with? Do we ignore it? Do we comment on it? Do we have a follow-up article on it? Whatever. We've got to make sure that we focus on that. And, of course, we can also track people that are talking about us, or I'm at Joe on Twitter, so I can make sure if somebody's talking about me, I can actually respond to that. And then this is directly into Twitter. If I wanted to type in a certain scenario, I'm looking at content marketing book, and I want to figure out who's talking about that, then my social media person can actively get involved in that. So then you create the content, and I want you to think about key questions. A lot of my friends will tell you, don't worry about your keyword external tool. All you want to do is talk to your customers all day long and figure out what their problems are, and those problems become stories that you're going to tell. And this is one of our customers for Social Track. We're looking at the recent posts, and if you look at the posts, these are just answers to questions. A whole house energy approach to energy efficiency, AC maintenance during the summer, 7 warning signs for your air conditioner. We're just solving problems for it, and that's what you want to focus on with your content. And the less you talk about yourself and the more you talk about your customers' problems, there it's going to be for you. Whenever anybody asks you to do a guest webinar or a guest blog post, you say yes. Blog's going to help you link back to your own site. It's going to spread the word of your good message. You're going to be positioning yourself like a media company. We talked about the book a little bit. And then what we did also is you want to create pillar content. That pillar content could be ebooks, it could be white papers, it could be a webinar series, because you've got the daily content, right? You've got your tweets, your Facebook updates, your blog posts, but you need something that's really going to attract people. This is a lead gen strategy for us about how to attract and retain customers with content. Lists are fantastic. We created a list called the top 42 content marketing blogs. We're giving away content gifts, folks. We're focusing on these people. We're saying, we love you. You're great. We did this whole research study, and we found that you guys are the top 42 content marketing blogs. And these are the probably the most well-trafficked sites out there for content marketing. And what we did was more than half of these people actually put that top blogs widget on the top and put it on their site, and they link to it, so we get a link back. And any one of these people we could call up at any time and say, hey, would you help us out with something? And they would say yes. And we've never met most of these people before. But that's what happens, because if you give content gifts, they know who you are, and you create such great goodwill and credibility in the community. A couple more things, and then I'll close it up. Social Media 411, we get questions all the time about how much should we share. We do something called Social Media 411. When you're sharing things, let's say it's on Twitter, for every 6 posts, 4 of them should be other people's content. Other people's content that you're sharing, 1 can be your content, and 1 can be something promotional. 4 other people's, really good, compelling content. 1 is your content, 1 is other people's. You cannot share your own content all the time. You don't build that goodwill. You're not giving those gifts out all the time. And you want to follow these hashtags, because we're listening, right? A hashtag is a £, and so we follow, like, our hashtag for Content Marketing Institute is CMI. For Cleveland Magazine, it's CLE20. So, you know, you can create your own, but you want to have your social media person listening to the hashtags that your customers are listening to, so that you know what stories to create, which things to share, and whatnot. You want to make sure your customers, the people that you're highlighting, these influencers, know that you're actually highlighting them. So what you can do is you can actually tag people in Facebook. So, for example, at the top says, thanks to Joe Chernoff from Eloqua. If we don't tag them in Eloqua, Eloqua might not ever know we're talking about. But we want them to know we're talking about them, because then they'll share that with their audience. So if you're going to share content, whether that's on Twitter or Facebook, you've got to make sure that you let them know that you're actually sharing their content. And then finally, make sure that you've got all these shareability buttons up here at the top. The worst thing that I see is people ask me, well, why aren't anybody sharing my really good content, Joe? And I'm telling them, because, well, I go to your site and you don't have any of these sharing buttons. So have at least the big 4, Facebook, Google+, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And then we have StumbleUpon too as the 5th one, but at least have the top 4 and put it on the top and the bottom of your article. And check all your stuff, because if you want your content to be shared, you got to set it up so it can be shared. And then the last thing I'm going to end up with is just get your community involved. Content Marketing Institute, we created it as a multi-author blog. And you might think about this too, to get people in your community. Remember that hit list and influencer list I was talking about before? We went out to those influencers and we asked them if they would create content for our site. And they all said yes. We have over 70 contributors to our site now. And what's great is we not only share it with our community, those people, those influencers, share it with their community as well, so we can expand the reach of our content. And then this is the results that we've had. We started the site on May of 2010, and now we're actually up to more than, let's see, 70,000 unique visitors a month in less than 2 years, which we think is pretty good stuff. And this is the great thing about it. This is kind of like the oh my gosh slide. The majority of our traffic comes from referral sites. That means that we're not beholden to Google. So we don't have to worry about what Google does and what their changes are. We're getting that traffic from social media and other people linking to us, which is so powerful. That's the best kind of traffic to get. And then it helps us in search engines, because we look at our main keyword, 5 of the top 10 are associated with us on our main keyword strength. So all this stuff that you can do really, really helps. So this is my last slide. Before we get to Q&A, John, I would just say I want you to start thinking like a publisher. So whatever you want to sell, whatever your product or service is, when you think about your storytelling platform, I want you to choose a niche, a content niche, which is different than necessarily what your product and service is in. Choose that niche so you can become the leading expert in the world, so that you can attract and retain customers in that niche. Develop and share the best multi-channel content on the planet. There's no excuses, folks. You can't just do content mediocre content is bad content for your brand. It's got to be the best of the best content. So you've got to invest in this area. And the more you remove yourself from the story, the farther it will travel, the more that people will share that content. So if you share a story that you think is awesome, but it's got you in it, and you're sort of got a little sales pitch in it, people are not going to share that message as much as you want them to. John, that's it. I know we've got 15 minutes left for questions. Do we have any questions out there?
We we got a couple here, Joe. So I'll throw them out, and you can answer them. Just a general comment. I've been on several of your webinars before. I learn something every time. So it's great to have someone, a good resource like you, that can share success stories not only for you but for other people. That it makes it worthwhile. The first question is, if we are just getting started, should we consider starting a blog first?
You know, it's a good question, John. I think that marketers get so hung up with the tools, and they'll see their competitors say, "Oh, they're doing a blog," and they say, "Oh, I need to do a blog too." Well, blog is just a tool, but I would say it's a very important tool that we probably need to consider. And if you're just getting started, it may be the best place to start because it could be the center of your entire content strategy. I'll give you an example real quick. If that blog stays at the center, that blog can be your magnet. It could be your magnet for all your social media, so that the tweets that you're sending out go back to your blog, your Facebook posts, your Google Plus posts, everything can come back to the blog. Search engines love blogs. Social media loves blogs. You can create it as a really good non-sales approach to it. So if you're looking, I mean, at the end of the day, you need some repository to put all your content to attract customers at the end of the day, and a blog is a good one. So if you're looking for a blog, you know, WordPress I would recommend as a great piece of technology. There are also a couple paid programs out there, and one I would look at is probably Compendium if you're looking for more of an enterprise type blogging platform is another one to look at.
Okay, great. Next question, do I need to commit to someone full-time to monitor our social media activity?
Well, I guess it depends on what size company you are. Let me put it in perspective, John. A company like a JetBlue, so large company, lots of consumers out there, they have 6 full-time people on Twitter at any 8-hour stretch, and they switch every 8 hours. So that means they have 18 people, full-time people, just on Twitter. Let's not talking about anything else, folks. So that's the new customer service is obviously social media. And more you're seeing that. You're actually seeing customer service is actually it's all becoming social media online. I would say that depending on the size of your company, you don't necessarily need somebody full-time, let's say if you're a small business, but you have to have somebody that this is their job. Kodak calls it the Chief Listening Officer. They actually created a position. They called it the Chief Listening Officer. You don't have to do that necessarily, but you need somebody to take on that role. So all that listening stuff that I was talking about, you need somebody that takes that and figures out where that goes. So if there's an issue on Twitter it's actually a customer service issue, that goes to customer service, right? But you have to have somebody that listens and does that. You get too many hands in the cookie jar, you're going to have a problem with that. Or maybe it's a sales lead, that's going to go to sales. Maybe it's a good storytelling opportunity that goes to your internal managing editor or your marketing department. So you need somebody that listens full time. We have somebody at the Content Marketing Institute, so we're a small business, and we have somebody that probably spends about 30 to 40% of her time doing this. It could be 100%, but right, she does other things, so about 30 to 40% of her time on this. So at minimum, somebody in your company needs to look for it. And by the way, this should not be an intern, and it should not be your brother-in-law or somebody like that. This is so important. This is your retail. This is your online retail spot. This is how people are going to know you, get to know you, your personality. Make sure this is somebody that understands your customers, understands your business, and then understands the policy you create, because you need a policy for how you're going to engage depending on what happens. If you don't have a social media policy, just type in IBM social media policy into Google. They've got a great policy that you can look at, and you can take that and mash that up into something that works for your company.
Great. Here's another interesting question. Is that if we start our content marketing, should we look to train our internal people to write for us, or should we outsource this function?
So I've seen it done both ways. I'll give you some examples. So I work with a VC company out of Boston called OpenView Venture Partners. OpenView does it almost all internally. They do use a few freelancers, but most of the content is internal. They hired a managing editor to oversee the entire process, and what they did as well is they have over 90%, almost all their employees actively participate in the blog, and they've got all kinds of incentives and everything set up to do that. So they've decided to do it internally. There's other companies that, like let's say American Express Open Forum. If you've ever been to Open Forum, That's a robust content platform for American Express, and they actually outsource almost all of that to other media companies, agencies, freelancers, a whole network of people. So they decided to outsource it. Two very successful content platforms, two different ways to do it. I mean, for Social Track, which is our small business blogging service, the reason why we created it was, I mean, honestly, I would tell anybody this. If you have the writing talent internally and you can be consistent about it and do it, then do it internally. If you know the keywords to focus on, how to do the social media, if you know all that, then fantastic, you should do it internally. But most of us, we're working a job, we're not used to publishing, we may not have good writers in our organization or somebody good to actually oversee that process. That's why we said, well, let's create a service like Social Track that can actually oversee that for people. So I would say, Johnny, if you can do it internally, great, but most people, I think the latest stats that I have, John, is I think it's 72% of companies outsource some portion of the content marketing process. So the majority of companies actually outsource something. You have to decide what you're good at and what's a good use of your time and what is not a good use of your time, because it all costs money. It just depends on if you're going to pay for it through people or you're going to outsource it.
Great, great. And the last question is, someone asked how we get a copy of this presentation. For those that are on this call, you'll be getting a follow-up email with links to SlideShare, so that you'll be able to pull this thing down. So, Joe, I think that's. Let me just check here and make sure. All right, here's another. What is your opinion on screening or removing content on Facebook wall for the sake of the brand?
Well, I would say that if you are, first of all, if you're getting negative feedback, which a lot of brands are very afraid of, and that's one of the big fears of social media, right? They're afraid of getting negative press in some way. I mean, I just blogged about this. McDonald's got a whole bunch of negative tweets on that. If somebody, I believe that if it does happen on your wall on Facebook, you can remove it. But if somebody's going to talk about you anyways, I think my concern is if somebody puts something negative on your wall and then you remove it and they know about it, they can make your life a living hell. And they can spread it out anywhere they want, because you don't have control over Twitter, over their own Facebook page, over anything else. They can go it to town. So what I would do is you should have a process set up so that if they do say something negative, you actually respond to that right there. So let's say, for example, JetBlue, let's talk about them because that's a really good situation. If you remember, John, last year when they had the JetBlue guy that basically jumped out of the plane and said, I'm done, I'm leaving.
Yep, right.
And it was a big catastrophe for JetBlue. Well, what they did is there are all kinds of people typing stuff on the Facebook page, and they said, you know what, we want to definitely talk about this, but let's talk about it over here. They wanted to get it off of Facebook where they don't have the control, and they said, move it over to the blog. So they put that right there, and they said, please, give us all your comments. They got thousands of comments on a blog post, a very well-constructed blog post about what happened, their perspective. They were able to tell their story, and they were able to control that feedback a little bit more, but not like control it by getting rid of it, but control it by it's on their platform and just let people go to town on it, and then they could actively respond to that. So I think it's a big mistake, and it's almost impossible on most platforms to get rid of a negative comment. Like if a negative review on another site, you can't get rid of that. You've got to basically overcome that by responding to that and creating really good content. That rises higher in the search rankings. But I would just make sure that it might be an opportunity to have you look like a human being and actually, because everybody gets negative reviews. The one thing I want to end with this, John, because I think it's so funny. I saw an interview from the guy from Bazaar Voice, and they do all those online reviews, big company that does that, and he said actually books on Amazon sell higher that have some negative reviews. If you have an Amazon product that has all positive reviews, it never sells as well as something with a negative review. Because it's real, right? People don't believe it. It's too good to be true. Right. So it's okay if you get a negative review. It's how you respond to it.
Right, right. Well, good. Well, that ends all the questions, Joe. Again, I thank you very much for your insights. Again, as always, always very enlightening. And thank you all the participants for participating, and you'll be getting an email from us with a link to the SlideShare. This concludes the webinar.